On Tuesday, the New York Mets made their first round of roster cuts in spring training. On the show today, I'll talk about who got cut, and I'll also make my predictions for who will make the roster come opening day.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, the New York Mets made 13 roster cuts on Tuesday, but there was also a player put on waivers, and that is the most notable move when it relates to the opening day roster. Sean Reed-Foley was put on outright waivers. Now, what does this mean? This means that any team in Major League Baseball can now claim Sean Reed-Foley, and he is off the Mets roster. If nobody claims him, the Mets can try to send him to Syracuse and keep his salary, where it is right now. It's the same thing we saw when Tomas Nido a couple years ago cleared waivers, and so he got to retain his MLB salary, but he was optioned down to AAA Syracuse. That's what the Mets are doing here. Most likely, some team will take a flyer on Sean Reed-Foley, and he will be off the Mets roster. This is a way to clear a spot in the 40, which I don't think that necessarily means that another move is coming just yet. But as we'll talk about some guys that might make this team who aren't on the roster, this is a way to open up that spot. And it's mostly just an admission that Sean Reed-Foley was not going to make this team. Now, Sean Reed-Foley last year pitched to a 1.66 ERA. He has been very good when on the mound. He just hasn't been on the mound much. Guy that had shoulder issues last year. We don't know if those are still plaguing him in camp. So the Mets make a move that's a little bit surprising, but I guess they're also potentially doing him a solid, allowing him to maybe latch on with another team early enough in camp to make a roster. Let's go through the roster cuts, and none of these are surprising. You have Ty Adcock, Adbert Alzolay, who wasn't going to pitch this year anyway. They signed Alzolay to a 2-year minor league deal. Dom Hamill, top pitching prospect, or one of the Mets' top pitching prospects. He goes down. Aver Ortega, a non-roster invite. Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell. So your three starting pitchers from the Syracuse Mets rotation all get that assignment down. On the position player front, all the top prospects: Ryan Clifford, Drew Gilbert, Kevin Parada, Jet Williams, Alex Ramirez, Luke Ritter, who's not necessarily considered a top prospect, but a guy that's been in Syracuse for some time. He gets the option down from camp. Rafael Ortega, who's been kind of hanging around the Mets for a couple years now. We saw him a bunch at the end of the 2023 season, signed under the minor league deal with the Mets. He is now assigned likely to Syracuse. So those are the 13 cuts. There's still, I think, 57 guys in camp, which is still a crazy amount. You got to go from a 57 man roster right now, just all the guys in camp, and you still have to make 31 cuts to get down to a 26-man roster by opening day. So let's talk about the non-roster guys who are still in camp, the guys that got the invite to be part of big league camp that are still fighting for jobs. On the pitching front, Genesis Cabrera, Chris Davinsky, Rico Garcia, Anthony Gasse, Grant Hartwig, Yaxel Rios, Jose Urena, and Brandon Waddle. Now, the names in that list that to me stick out as guys that could actually make this team, the most prominent is Genesis Cabrera, a guy that last year pitched to a 3.59 ERA in the Blue Jays bullpen, made 69 appearances, which is super nice. He's a guy that I think has a potential inside track to making this team. It's been a good start to spring so far for Genesis Cabrera. 4 strikeouts, 2 perfect innings. I think he's got a real shot here, and we'll talk about him more as I break down the potential bullpen options in the final segment today. Yaxel Rios is worth mentioning because he can get it up to 100 miles per hour. I think his lack of control probably going to keep him in Syracuse to start the season. Jose Urena just signed that minor league deal where he would make $2 million if he is part of the big league roster. That's definitely a guy that's going to get some serious consideration here to help that back into the rotation and bullpen mix, a sort of swingman role that he served last year with the Rangers. He pitched to a 3.80 ERA in 109 innings last year. Was much better out of the bullpen than in the rotation. He's definitely a name to watch in camp. On the position player front, non-roster guys, you still have most of your catchers: Jackson Reitz, Hayden Sanger, and Chris Williams. Williams is the one guy I would make note of. To me, he's the third catcher on the depth chart right now. 3 years in a row in the minor leagues, he posted an OPS over 800 from a position where you don't get a lot of offense. He had 17 home runs in 88 games last year. In 2023, he had 21 home runs in 95 games. All of that in AAA. Has never made it up to the big leagues, but he gives you some pop, a legitimate bat behind the dish. If there was an injury to one of your catchers, I think Williams would be the guy. Most likely, though, he'll get cut by the end of camp. So far, he is 3 for 11 with a double and a home run, 909 OPS, and he's got a ton of playing time so far. Infielders, you got Joey Meneses, Luis De Los Santos, Donovan Walton are your non-roster guys still in camp. On the outfield side, there's no non-roster invites left, but you have 2 guys who are on the 40 and out of options. That's Jose Azucar and Alex Canario. Canario is the guy the Mets got in the trade with the Cubs about a week ago now. A 24-year-old outfielder who has yet to have a long extended run in the big leagues, but his limited sample size have been good. He's a guy with power, but I think for both Azucar and Canario, and Azucar's had a pretty good camp so far too, those guys are unlikely to make the roster unless Starling Marte or Brandon Nimmo. Nimmo is also dealing with knee soreness, but it doesn't seem like that's too concerning. Marte, they say, is going to get into some games soon. So right now they're making it appear like both of those guys will be good to go. If they are, I don't think there's any spot in this roster for Canario or Azucar. But if Marte goes down and starts the year on the IL, I think one of those 2 guys will actually get a spot. This leads me to the easiest position group that we can predict today. So we're going to start this off to lock in 6 spots on the 26-man roster. That's your outfield. Brandon Nimmo, Jose Siri, Juan Soto. That's going to be your starting outfield left to right, in my opinion. You have Starling Marte and Jesse Winker as further outfield depth, but part of a DH platoon between the 2 of them. And Tyrone Taylor is your 4th outfielder. I am very confident that those will be 6 spots on the opening day roster that are locked up, barring injury. Next, we're going to talk about the infield and the starting rotation. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. You're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious. Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety of Wonderful Pistachios because it's the perfect on-the-go snack. And my favorite flavor is the honey roasted. But I actually have yet to try the chili roasted, and I need to go out to the store and pick up some more Wonderful Pistachios. I think I'm going to get a bag of the honey roasted because it's my go-to favorite. I'm going to try that chili roasted out. There are so many flavors to choose from. And if you like the in-shell options as a classic favorite, they have those for you as well. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. Get snackin' and crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day, and we're getting closer and closer to the halfway mark. I appreciate all of you to hit that big red button and subscribe. Let's talk about the other locks for the Mets roster. We'll start behind the dish. Barring injury, Francisco Alvarez and Luis Torrens will be your catching tandem, with Alvarez obviously getting a lion's share of the playing time. Your infield, it's going to be Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, and Mark Vientos around the horn to start the season. Jeff McNeil is the guy with the shortest leash there. At some point, you could see Luis Angel Acuna or Ronnie Mauricio, or even further down the line, Jet Williams potentially grabbing some playing time from McNeil. And you might see Brett Baty doing that as well. But for now, Jeff McNeil should be your opening day starter. Now, this leaves 1 spot left on the roster. You have 6 outfielders. You have 4 infield locks, 2 catchers. That's 12 of 13 roster spots. And we've talked about this position battle a lot. Your candidates, Ronnie Mauricio, but it seems like he's going to start the season in Syracuse to shake off some of that rust, get everyday playing time after having a lost year due to the torn ACL. You have Luis Angel Acuna and Brett Baty, both of which started on Tuesday night at unfamiliar positions, or at least from what we have seen in game. Acuna started over at third, Baty started at second. So good to see them get some looks at another spot. Jared Young is on the 40-man roster and provides you another option. I think he's unlikely to make the team. He does have minor league options. He is more first base, third base, potentially corner outfield depth. I think he can play second base in a pinch, but he's more a corner guy. I imagine he's not going to break camp. You have non-roster invites that are worth mentioning here. Donovan Walton and Luis De Los Santos. If you want to back up shortstop, those guys are your other options outside of Acuna. But so far, you're looking at who is performing well in camp, and Brett Baty is clearly the early favorite to grab this job based on his performance. He went 1 for 2 with a walk on Tuesday. He's now hitting .444 with a 500 on base, .833 slug with 2 home runs and a double so far in camp, a 1.333 OPS. You compare that to the field. You got Acuna, who's 0 for 3, went 0 for 3, on Tuesday night, bring his slash line to 154 for his average, 214 first on base, 154 for his slug. That's a 368 OPS. Donovan Walton's hitting 200. Luis De Los Santos is hitting 143. Ronnie Mauricio has yet to get in a game. So my prediction, which is something that I predicted a couple weeks ago, is that Brett Baty is going to make the opening day roster. Does that mean he is going to hold on to that spot for the entirety of the season and we never see Luis Angel Acuna? No, but to me, Baty is best positioned to win this job. He's doing a great job of it already with the performance he's had so far. And I think Acuna stands to gain more developmentally in AAA, as I've talked about, than Baty. Baty, to me, the only thing that's left for him to do is add versatility still. Like you might see him play shortstop in a spring training game just to prove he can do it. And as far as that's concerned, is he going to grade out as an elite defender at short? No. Can he play shortstop at the end of a blowout on either end of the spectrum? If the Mets are up 12-1 or they're losing 10-1 and you want to get Lindor off his feet for a couple of innings, can Baty stand at the position for a couple of innings and the world's not going to explode? I think so. But he's going to give you a left-handed bat off the bench, which the Mets won't have when Jesse Winker's in the starting lineup. He could play some second base. He could play some third base. And I think he can even play some first base for you as well. I think Baty makes this roster. Now, again, if Marte is on the IL, my prediction would be that Alex Canario would grab another spot. I'm still not predicting that Acuna and Baty make this team. I really think Acuna is going to get more seasoning in AAA. And again, Mauricio needs to shake off that rust. So let's pull up an opening day lineup, shall we? Here's my prediction for the Mets opening day lineup. And the reason why I'm predicting it this way, as you look at DH and see Starling Marte in the middle of that lineup, is because you're playing against the Astros. And I would imagine that Framber Valdez is their opening day starting pitcher. So if that's the case, Francisco Lindor batting leadoff, Juan Soto batting second, Pete Alonso batting third, Brandon Nimmo in the cleanup spot playing left, Mark Vientos at third base batting fifth, Starling Marte your DH in the sixth hole. The reason I think that the DH spot might be sixth is because when you have a righty on the mound, I think it's going to be Jesse Winker, and I'm imagining Jesse Winker cracking that top six in the lineup, and I would think that might be consistent with that, at least in the early going, having Marte there, having Alvarez batting seventh, Jeff McNeil batting eighth, Jose Siri, your spark plug, defensive first, but a guy with plenty of pop center fielder. I think he gets the early run as your starting center fielder, so to speak, with Tyrone Taylor being more the fourth outfielder. Your bench on opening day would be Luis Torrens, Jesse Winker, because you have a lefty on the mound. You would have Tyrone Taylor and Brett Baty would be the fourth spot. Now, opening day starting pitcher, Clay Holmes I have as the opening day starter. We've talked about this a bit. If the Mets have Kodai Senga start in either the second or the third slot, they will get more days off for him. If you have Kodai Senga in the second slot and you go with the 5-man rotation, Kodai Senga would start the Mets home opener. So that's why I believe they're going to go with Holmes on opening day. Kodai Senga in that second spot, David Peterson to break up your rotation in the third spot with the one lefty that you're going to have. Then I think it's going to be Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, and Griffin Canning. I think all of them make the team. I think they might piggyback two of those final three. I'm not going to commit to a necessary order from 4 to 6. I don't know who is going to get the nod there. Tyler McGill did make his spring debut on Tuesday, 47 pitches, I believe 32 were strikes. He went 2 2/3, 2 hits, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. He struggled to put guys away, which can be an issue with Tyler McGill, where he's attacking the zone and he doesn't always have that put away pitch. So that's definitely something to monitor. But he's got really good stuff. And the more and more I look at the bullpen picture, I can't see McGill not making this team. I think they're going to go with 6 starting pitchers. You're going to have the top 3 that are locks to get starts in Holmes, Senga, and Peterson. And then they might get creative with the final 2 spots in that rotation with how they manage it. Are they piggybacking Blackburn and Canning? Are they piggybacking McGill and Canning? And there's a lot of ways that they can go about it. But I think they're going to start the season with a 5-man rotation where you're going to have those top 3 guys starting in a 5-man rotation because there is enough off days that those guys would get extra rest throughout. You might have a 4th guy that's also in that mix and 2 guys piggybacking, or they could really be creative with it. But I think all 6 of those starting pitchers will make your opening day roster. And if they do, that means there's 7 slots available in that bullpen. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to talk about the bullpen mix come opening day, who is going to make this team. And then I'll throw up a graphic that'll give you my complete opening day 26-man roster. So stay tuned for that. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about the Mets bullpen. Who's left to be cut? Who's a lock to make it? We're going to run through it. First thing first, bullpen locks. Edwin Diaz is your closer. Ryan Stanek, one of your setup men. Jose Budo, no options. So he is going to make the team. That means they cannot send him down to the minor leagues. If they don't want him on the open day roster, they have to put him on waivers. And I don't think the Mets want to lose Budo. So I think he's going to be a lock to make this team. That's 3 spots. The 4th guy that I can't call a complete lock because he does have an option, but I can't see the Mets using it to start the season is Reed Garrett. I think Reed Garrett is going to be part of this bullpen for sure to open the year. That's 4 guys. I have not mentioned AJ Minter and Daniel Nunez, who could arguably be your best 2 relievers, not named Edwin Diaz, but I don't think either of them breaks camp with the big league club. For Nunez, I think the Mets are really going to slow play him. He has options. This is a guy that had that really, tough injury at the end of the season. It was a flexor injury. That's one that you want to be careful with because we know what can happen to pitchers, and you just want to be cautious because this is a guy that has such a dynamic arm for you that you want to pitch big moments in October, but you got to get him there. I think one way to get him there is to really, really be cautious at the beginning of the season. Have him in AAA on a very set pitching schedule where he knows the exact day he's pitching. He doesn't have to worry about any, back-to-backs or coming in when you weren't expecting it. He is just a guy that's on a fixed pitching schedule. Once he proves health, once you feel really good, once you have a spot open in that bullpen, and that's naturally going to happen throughout the season, you call up Daniel Nunez. Now, AJ Minter, from what we've heard, he is healthy, but he is a little bit further back than some of the other pitchers, and the Mets want to make sure he's right. I imagine we get an IL stint to start the season, give him an extra couple weeks in Syracuse to face a bunch of hitters and lives and, just get himself right. Maybe he does have a stint on a rehab appearance in Syracuse to get some game action. And then once AJ Minter is good to go to be your primary seven man, a guy that can go back-to-back days, all that good stuff, he'll come up and then the Mets will make a move on their roster. Now, with that said, I think there is some opportunities here for left-handed pitchers to make this team. Danny Young is out of options. Now, I don't necessarily think that he is going to hold on to a roster spot all season. I think at some point, Danny Young's going to get a DFA just because I can't see him pitching well enough to have that spot locked down, especially when there's so many other guys that aren't going to have the roster flexibility. So the Mets can get out in front of it and, non-tender him, or not non-tender, DFA him at the end of camp and see if they can pass him through waivers. I think he probably makes this team. So this is the one that I felt least good about, but I'm going to predict that Danny Young makes it. I also think that a non-roster guy is going to make it. I think Genesis Cabrera is going to make this team. So I think the Mets are going to have two lefties in their bullpen. They'll let those guys sort of show their stuff for a couple weeks. When AJ Minter is good to go, one of those guys will get the axe and be taken off the roster. That's my prediction. Now, with that said, there's still another spot to talk about. There's 40-man roster guys that have options that I don't think make this team. Justin Hageman is considered starting pitching depth. I don't think he makes the roster. Kevin Herget, Austin Warren, Tyler Zuber, all in the 40 with options. I think all those guys get sent down. There's two 40-man guys that are on the bubble for me, and this pretty much was sort of the final decision on what the roster was going to be. And if I'm actually being honest, I have Max Kranick making this no matter what. I think Max Kranick has proven that he has electric stuff, and I think he's going to be a real Swiss Army knife weapon for the Mets, where they're going to be able to have him pitch and leverage and be a guy that might set up Edwin Diaz. He can get 4 outs potentially in those spots where maybe you have someone gets into a jam in the 7th and you need someone to get a big strikeout to close out the inning, and that's Kranick, and he stays on for the 8th and is that bridge to Diaz. I think there's other times where the starting pitcher is going to go 5 and Kranick's going to come in the 6th and give you 2 innings. I think there's going to be times where maybe the Mets want an opener because Griffin Canning's about to face a tough lineup, and you go with Kranick to open the game to hopefully get through the top of the lineup and hand the ball to Canning, where it's not having to go up against Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman to start his night, so to speak. So I think that's the move the Mets make. Huascar Braziban was the guy that I was also considering. But for me, I think he's going to get squeezed here. Although I would say there is every chance the Mets DFA Danny Young, and it's Braziban and Kranick that make this team. I could really see it go either which way. But ultimately, I leaned with the roster flexibility side of things where you can put Braziban in Syracuse to start the year. You can't do that for Danny Young, and that's why I think the Mets ultimately will go that route. So with that said, here is my opening day roster prediction for the New York Mets. To run through it one last time, your starting rotation, it's Kodai Senga, David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Paul Blackburn, Tyler McGill, and Griffin Canning. On the IL, you have Frankie Montas, who's not likely to return until middle of May at best, might be more likely June. Sean and I, we haven't got an update lately, which isn't the worst thing, but remember when his oblique injury was announced, they did say it could be 7 days, it could be 14 days, it could be 21 days that he shut down before throwing. I think we're about a week in from that point. Still no word of him throwing again. So we'll see. We'll see when Minaya is cleared to go with that oblique, but I would not expect him until middle of April at best. But honestly, I think more likely you're looking at end of April, early May. So that's where that 6-man rotation is going to play in, where I think the Mets are going to want to roster all those guys, figure out the best mix, and go from there. So that's your rotation for now. Your bullpen, Edwin Diaz, the closer, Stanek and Garrett, the primary setup men on opening day, Jose Budo and Max Kranick, guys that can give you multiple innings and potentially pitch and leverage. Genesis Cabrera and Danny Young, a pair of lefties to round out the pen. Your catchers, Alvarez and Terrence. Infield around the diamond, Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos with Brett Baty as your utility infielder. Outfield, Juan Soto, Brandon Nimmo, Jose Siri, Tyrone Taylor. DH platoon, Starling Marte and Jesse Winker. And then the last injury note that I did not mention there, going over the roster, is the AJ Minter one that I talked about. I think he starts the year on the IL, but I think he's the first off the IL for the Mets, where it will be a short stint, minimum amount of days, and then he gets put on the roster and the Mets make another move. Maybe that's cutting Danny Young. Maybe that's cutting Genesis Cabrera, depending on who has pitched better across the first couple weeks of the season. I really think that's what we're looking at for the New York Mets on opening day. Guys that aren't on this roster that I think have a good chance to make the team. Huascar Brazaban, I think, has a good shot when it comes to the relievers. Beyond him, who else makes sense to me? Outside shot at Chris Davinsky or Yaxel Rios as non-roster guys. Roster guys, maybe a Tyler Zuber. I still don't think so. I really think it's going to come down to Brazaban, Kranick, Danny Young, Genesis Cabrera, those guys being in the mix at the end of camp here. And then again, if AJ Minter makes the team or if Daniel Nunez makes the team, that squeezes another one of these guys out of the picture. Luis Angel Acuna could certainly make it over Brett Baty. Alex Canario could certainly make it if Starling Marte hits the IL. So there's definitely a lot of intrigue left in camp. You got to see how these guys perform, and that'll dictate some of this for sure. And we got about 3 weeks and a day until opening day. So you're going to see plenty more cuts to come here. You'll typically see, maybe 10 guys cut each wave as they'll go from now a 57 man group in camp to maybe next time they get in the 40s, maybe they get down to 45, and then maybe they get into the high 30s, and then all of a sudden they get to the low 30s and they're making their final cuts, and then eventually you get to that 26-man roster. Overall, I think this team is well-rounded. I think the lineup is great, honestly. I'm excited to see what that top of the lineup is going to do with Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Nimmo, and Vientos. I'm encouraged by the DH platoon. I want to see Francisco Alvarez potentially have a breakout season from the catcher position. I think Jose Siri is going to offer plenty of thump at the bottom of the lineup, but also he's going to be a frustrating at bat at times. Tyrone Taylor as your fourth outfielder. You feel pretty good there. And Brett Baty's swinging the bat pretty well, so I'm curious to see how he factors into the mix. Can Jeff McNeil hold on to a lion's share of the playing time, or is Baty cut into it? And then at what point do we see an Acuna or a Mauricio factor into the mix coming up from Syracuse if they get off to a torrid start to the season? It's going to be a lot of fun to continue to monitor all of this. So make sure that you are subscribed if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss any more episodes of Locked On Mets to come. On tomorrow's show, we might talk about Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. That was originally the plan tonight, but I wanted to do an opening day roster prediction once I saw the first wave of roster cuts. So we got that. But we'll be talking about if Lindor and Soto are the top two players in the National League East and what their impact can be on the Mets this season. So that'll be a fun show. Again, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you want to follow me on social, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. After your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything, the world of sports. I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. By Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.